when we talk about compassion fatigue or empathic overwhelm, as we're going to learn about, you may first wonder what it is and what it includes. And if you look at this list of symptoms I've got listed here, compassion fatigue actually looks a lot like burnout. Is empathy always 100% good? Or are there times when it can lead to difficulties? Mindfulness is not meditation. Mindfulness is really just the capacity of our minds to be present with a situation and not react to it. It's really more the capacity for awareness, for clear awareness of a situation in life.
Welcome and thank you for joining us for another Justia webinar. My name is Nina and I'll be the moderator for today. Now, to kick things off, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, Claire Parsons. Claire E. Parsons is of counsel with Bricker Graydon LLP. She practices in the areas of school law, employment law, and litigation in both Kentucky and Ohio. In addition to being an experienced attorney, mom of 2 girls, and an active community leader, Claire is a popular and well-known speaker and writer on the topics of attorney mental health, mindfulness, compassion, and stress management. She is chair of the Wellness Committee for the Ohio State Bar Association and Bricker Graydon. The webinar that you're about to watch will be approximately 1 hour, and Claire will happily take questions from the audience as we go. So if you have any questions that pop up as you're watching the webinar, please feel free to submit those by clicking the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen and sending them in there. Now, without further ado, here is Claire to discuss emotional strain in law, identifying and managing empathic overwhelm.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here today. So we're going to be talking about empathic overwhelm today. And I bet you may not have heard the term empathic overwhelm. You probably have heard a very different term, which is compassion fatigue. In fact, many experts would say that the better term to use is empathic overwhelm, which is why I'm using it today. But that's in part what we're going to talk about. So compassion fatigue is a real phenomenon. It is a real thing that happens to people in helping professions, that sometimes we do get overburdened, overstrained in the process of helping others. But that actually most of the time is really the result of empathy and not compassion. And actually, compassion may be one of the ways that we can help ourselves better. So it's not really the problem, but more of a solution. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. So I am a practicing lawyer. I present and teach mindfulness. I've been doing the mindfulness practices for more than 10 years, and I absolutely use them a lot in my law practice. I practice in the area of school law, and it's a very emotional and intense area of practice. So I have a lot of experience working with these. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So when we talk about compassion fatigue or empathic overwhelm, as we're going to learn about, you may first wonder what it is and what it includes. And if you look at this list of symptoms I've got listed here, compassion fatigue actually looks a lot like burnout. And burnout is a really important term to understand for those in the legal profession. It is something that many of us are at risk of experience. And compassion fatigue is very similar. So it includes emotional overwhelm. It includes cynicism. For lawyers who a lot of times went to law school to help people, when we start to feel cynicism and start to feel like we're unmotivated or like the stuff that we try to do maybe doesn't have an impact, that's a red flag. And that should cause any of us to think a little bit more deeply about what we can do to help ourselves or get help from others. Numbing behaviors or detachment, those are some classic signs of compassion fatigue. Loss of productivity and motivation. For lawyers who are often achievers, type A personalities, when we get that loss of motivation, it's another red flag. And then, of course, there is sustained and subdued dark moods or loss of energy, or just a feeling that the needs or demands of a situation are more than what we have to offer. And that feeling of overwhelm is one of the worst feelings that anyone can experience, but specifically as a lawyer, to have that feeling of overwhelm where you can't actually do what needs to be done, that is a really hard place to be in. So when I talk today about using a better term to describe this, to describe what we know of as compassion fatigue, what I am not doing is saying that the condition and the reality doesn't exist. It absolutely does exist, but many of the times putting the blame or the identifying the problem as one of compassion is maybe not accurate. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is some better ways of managing some of these things. So all of these situations, all of these kind of symptoms of compassion fatigue, empathic overwhelm, as you can see, when you're talking about the fact that lawyers are already dealing with complicated legal issues, difficult client situations, and a myriad of relationships, you can understand how this very quickly can implicate our ethical duties. And many times in sessions relating to attorney wellness, I see presenters go to the rules relating to impairment. And I think that those are certainly relevant, but I think on a day-to-day basis, most of us are really thinking more about our underlying fundamental ethical duties. So I want to talk about those instead. And what I kind of posit to you is just looking at our everyday ethical duties. It really does implicitly include this obligation to take care of ourselves, to know our limits, and to understand how to manage these things a little bit better. So let's first look at competence, which is what many of us kind of automatically understand to be the rule that requires us to know what we're doing before we take on a case. Um, but it's not just knowledge. It's also the thoroughness and preparation reasonably necessary for the representation, which means we not only have to have the knowledge in our brains and the experience from our years of practice, we also have to have the bandwidth to handle the matter. And that includes everything that comes with it. So let's look at comment 5 to this, and you can see it a little bit more clearly, where it's not just knowledge, right? It includes inquiry and analysis into the factual and legal issues. That sometimes includes the relationship issues, the personality issues, how much time and attention and how much emotional bandwidth do we have to invest in the case? Do we have the right support in our firm? Do we have the right support on our team to be able to take on the whole matter? Because as we all know, it's not always just legal advice and analysis that we're asked to give. It's sometimes life advice. And sometimes it is just learning how to deal with a difficult situation and going into a difficult situation with a client that is actually being asked of us. If you look at Rule 1.3, which is diligence, and this is our obligation to persist with a case, to actually manage the day-to-day affairs of the matter. Sometimes these matters go on for months and years and a long time. It is that commitment and dedication that we really have to look out for with diligence. And when you look at some of the language in the model rules, you see that it talks about commitment and dedication, zeal and advocacy, using professional discretion in how we pursue different matters, and treating all people in the legal process with courtesy and respect. So this is not just a function of our minds being able to handle what is in the case. This is a little bit that our hearts and our spirit have to be in it when we're representing clients. And obviously, we maybe don't always feel compelled in, such strong emotional attachments to cases. And I think some level of moderation there is actually helpful. But we do have to consistently pay attention to it, even when the situation is difficult. When you look at comment 3, I point this comment out because I think when it comes to difficult cases, the ones that, take too long to settle or resolve, the ones with maybe difficult client or opposing counsel cases, I think those often are some of the ones that are the easiest to kind of want to put off or procrastinate about. And I point out this procrastination comment in comment 3 to Rule 1.3 that just talks about procrastination being a real risk factors for lawyers. And I will tell you, I do not believe procrastination most of the time happens as a result of laziness or not caring. I actually think procrastination comes more from caring too much, having anxiety about things, having doubts, having worries and being unsure. And when you're talking about difficult cases that prompt something that feels like compassion fatigue or empathic overwhelm, it's a risk factor. So it's something to think about in terms of just managing ourselves better so that we can continue to consistently manage the cases that we have before us. And then finally, if you look at rules 3.4 and 3.5 that talk about our behavior before tribunals, our relationships with other people, it makes it really clear. And I think that, when you look at these rules with fresh eyes, I encourage you to do so as you go through your practice. It's really a big ask of us. We have to behave appropriately even when other people are not. That's our professional calling. That's our vocation. It's what we have to do, but it doesn't make it easy. And so we have this obligation to do the right thing, even when maybe judges aren't, even when maybe our opposing counsel doesn't make it easy. It is that piece of it that really can set us up for these feelings of difficulty and overwhelm in managing our cases. So now we're going to talk about what we actually can do about it. Okay. Now, nothing I'm going to say today is going to be magic. I don't have magic answers for how to make all of the troubles in law practice go away. Mindfulness and compassion do not do that. But what they actually can do is help us learn to manage difficulty, to maybe see difficulty with a little bit fresher eyes, and then learn some strategies to be able to manage it in our minds, in our hearts, in our bodies, so that we can go into difficulty with a little bit more ease, a little bit more confidence, and maybe an understanding that we are allowed to ask for help. So when we talk about compassion fatigue, the term that many people use, I want to encourage you to instead think about empathic overwhelm. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the misunderstandings between the two first. So compassion fatigue, as we've talked about, is this array of symptoms that comes up when we are dealing with difficulty and we feel like we are overwhelmed by it. And often this comes up because we are trying to help others and we are running into roadblocks, whatever they may be. So very real thing, but I don't think compassion is really the issue. And we're going to talk about why next. So a lot of times in our culture, I want you to pay attention to language here, because in our culture, there's the use of the word empathy comes up quite a lot. And in many cases, there tends to be a very positive commentary about empathy, where people need more empathy for each other, and that would actually solve most problems. Now, right now, there's some political discussion of the word empathy, and I'm not really talking about that kind of dialogue. What I'm really talking about is the clinical definitions of the term empathy and compassion. But what I want you to ask is empathy always 100% good? Or are there times when it can lead to difficulties? And that's what we want to talk about next. So I want you to look at these images. And I want you to ask which one is empathy. So we have a situation with two people who are friends or loved ones hugging each other on the left, with the woman in the pink hat hugging her friend in the white sweatshirt. And I wonder if you think that's empathy. And then we have the picture of people celebrating someone, maybe in the workplace, all together. And I ask you, is that empathy? And then we have two, it looks like lawyers who must have just experienced a defeat, a trial or in court, and they're agonizing together outside. And then we have two probably lawyers arguing on the far right. They're arguing with each other in heated emotion. And what I want to point out to you is that all of those include empathy. Okay. So empathy really, and when we're talking about it today, we're talking about effective empathy. So this is our ability as humans to kind of take on the emotions of those around us. And that's a really important human trait. It's a human faculty that I don't want to take away from you. And I don't think life would be living without it. We need empathy. It's really an important thing. But at the same time, empathy has some downsides. And one of the downsides is that when we are able to take on the positive emotions and the celebratory emotions of those around us, we are also able to take on the sadness, the hurt, the anger. And in some cases, we are actually able to mirror that back automatically. And it can actually make a situation a lot worse. And so the one question I also want to ask when you're looking at these images is, which of these images do you experience the most in your law practice? Hopefully there's some of the stuff on the left side of the screen. Hopefully there's some joy, some celebration, some camaraderie in your work and with your clients. I hope you have that. But more often than not, we're dealing with stress. We're dealing with an adversarial situation. We're dealing with fights. We're dealing with anger, sadness, disappointment. And so if we don't learn some ways to manage that empathy and learn to balance it, we put ourselves at risk for dealing with being subject to whatever the emotions are of the room we walk into. So let's talk about the difference between compassion and empathy, because I do find that in addition to common commentary about empathy and compassion, some of which is good and some of which maybe misses some things, there is often not a lot of effort to be precise with language and define terms. So empathy and compassion have each been studied in clinical settings. They've each been kind of differentiated. And what's really interesting is that although empathy and compassion are related, they actually process in very different parts of the brain. And so they actually affect us very different. So compassion, in terms of the clinical definition of this term, it means the presence with suffering and the willingness to help. And I hope that sounds really familiar to you, because I would tell you that's what lawyers do every day. That is our job, to go into suffering with our clients, but maintain the ability and the equanimity to be able to actually help the clients, not to take on their problems, but to help look at them, get clear about them, and try to find a solution. And when we are in compassion, it affects us so much differently than empathy, because we're not necessarily taking on the suffering. We're having some distance from it. And our emphasis really here is on our connection to our fellow human beings. And when we are in connection with fellow human beings, we are at our best, we are at our strongest. And in fact, we evolved as a species in groups for a reason. And we know that our connection is our salvation in many times. So when we are in compassion, we are experiencing connection. And that connection results in an experience that is much more stable, durable, and it supports our health. And we're going to talk about exactly how later on in the presentation. Now, empathy is different. As we talked about, we're talking about effective empathy here, not really cognitive empathy, where we're really trying to understand how someone's situation is. That's a very useful skill in law practice, but not exactly what we're talking about here. And when we are in empathy, we're actually kind of in our own experience, and we're focusing on an individual. So we're not as much thinking about connection, we're experiencing ourself. And it's really more about our reaction to someone else's emotional plight. And that is isolating, it can be overwhelming, and the result is an experience that burns out quickly, but is very powerful. Okay? So it's not really so much that empathy is good or bad. It is both. Empathy is a great thing for humans to have. It's an essential thing, but it does have some downsides. And we also need to learn some strategies for managing and balancing it. So let's talk about compassion as a process. Okay? So unlike empathy, where we see someone's emotional experience and we kind of take it on ourselves, compassion is actually a little bit different. And in the clinical setting, this has been looked at, and compassion is actually more of a process. So I can't sit here and tell you that compassion is a singular emotion. It's really not an emotion, although emotions definitely come up. And in fact, compassion may not feel the same way to each of us, and it may vary in terms of how it presents in different contexts, because compassion is really more a process of our response to a difficulty. So the first piece of compassion is awareness of suffering. And I'm saying the first one is the upper left-hand corner on the slide here. And then the next piece of compassion, the next step is We become aware of suffering, and then we develop feelings of connection and concern. Okay? So these first two steps are really, you might say, similar to effective empathy, where you see someone else's situations and you begin to kind of understand and get closer to their emotional experience. But compassion departs from empathy with step 3, 4, 5. And that is really where we start to think about, what can I do to help? You know, and sometimes with compassion, we maybe don't have the ability to actually help. But if we form a desire to relieve the suffering, a desire to make it better in some way, even if it is just with a wish, we form a belief that we can make a difference, and we develop a willingness to respond or take action. Then we shift out of empathy. We shift into compassion. And at the end of it, if you ever allow yourself time to watch this process unfold in your body, I have done so a few times with my meditation practice, and it absolutely happens. You will notice a sense of satisfaction, a warm glow, and a sense of well being. And if you've ever helped someone in a small way where it's moderate enough, where it's not super stressful, where you can pay attention, you may notice that you help someone and then you feel good. You're in a good mood. You feel uplifted. You might be smiling. You might feel more energetic. That is because the compassion response is happening to you. And when that occurs, we have a release of positive hormones, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, which are affiliated with well-being, satisfaction, and connection and love. So when we are in compassion, the experience is very different than when we are in empathy. So what we're going to talk about next, though, is that, of course, we don't just get to choose, right? It's not like a difficult situation comes up and we are like the Terminator and we see in our, our field of vision an option to choose compassion or empathy, right? It doesn't really work that way. But one thing that's really good is that when it comes to things like mindfulness and compassion, both of those faculties are innate faculties of mind. Both of those are in us, assuming we don't have some form of impairment, mentally or physically, or some kind of other issue. They are innate human traits, okay? But we can also train them up. We can also work to cultivate these traits so they're more present in our lives. And so we can remove roadblocks to them arising in the situations when we need them. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So you won't be able to listen to this 1 hour seminar and then go on into your life and think, oh, compassion, I've got it now. Claire presented everything in the PowerPoint. Now I'll just go use it. It's really much more about starting to find some small ways to train these skills up, starting to find some strategies to take care of yourself better that will help you care for others better, and maybe going and exploring some other ideas more deeply. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. So the three things we're going to talk about, the three places you can start with training these skills up or exploring more deeply, are mindfulness. And that does not just mean meditation, although that's a great way to start. We're going to talk about our zone of tolerance, and we're going to talk about common humanity. So mindfulness is really creating the stability of mind and the equanimity to be able to see a difficulty and not be so reactive and knocked around by it. The zone of tolerance is really more about learning our own needs and learning the practice and habit of checking in with ourselves on a regular basis to ensure we are meeting our own needs, because it will make us more able to meet the needs of other people around us with less stress and difficulty. And then the final piece, because the big difference between compassion and empathy is connection, the last piece I'm going to talk about is a few strategies, small strategies, to start thinking more about that connection piece instead of getting lost in our own individual experience, which is very easy and common for humans to do. So let's get into these practices and strategies next. So we're going to talk about mindfulness next. And one thing I want to say is that mindfulness is not meditation. Okay. Mindfulness is something that is certainly strengthened by meditation. And it is certainly supported by meditation, and meditation has a lot of other benefits beyond that. And if you ever want to talk about any of that, my information is in the end of the slide, and I hope you will reach out. But you have probably heard lots of studies that talk about the power of mindfulness to change the way we respond to stress, to help us be healthier, happier, more satisfied, and honestly, in many cases, more efficient at work. And mindfulness is really just the capacity of our minds to be present with a situation and not react to it. It's really more the capacity for awareness, for clear awareness of a situation in life. But mindfulness almost never functions by itself. And in fact, mindfulness and compassion really work together. I've written a book called How to Be a Badass Lawyer, and I explain some of these practices in my book. And one of the analogies I use is that of an empty cave versus the cave on the right that has some nice things that make it a little bit more comfortable. And guys, when mindfulness and compassion work together, it's like having a spacious cave to kind of hang out in and kind of perceive the world, but having the ability to make yourself a little bit more comfortable as you do it. And it's that little bit of extra comfort and care that really can help us. And all of that comfort and care doesn't only have to come from yourself, but you can actually train some of that in yourself as well, and it really can be helpful. So mindfulness and compassion, they really work together. So if you are someone who doesn't necessarily want to meditate, if you do meditate and you practice focusing on the breath or another practice over time, you will see this capacity for mindfulness grow, and it will become more of a trait in your life where your mind might be able to focus. You might be able to relax and accept things a little bit easier. You might slow down and be a little bit more patient, and that may help you in your life. But if you don't really want to meditate, you're not going to do it. There are some ways that informal practice actually can help as well. Or there's actually some ways that you can kind of just play with this in your daily life and then maybe see where it goes and what other practices you might want to try down the road. So the three elements of mindfulness that are really important is non-judgment, where we start to not get lost in our reactions so much. A huge part of our experience as human and as lawyers is actually our reactions to things. And we can't always control what happens in life, but we do have a little bit of control over some of those reactions. And we can learn to let go of them and not be so bossed around by them. And that actually creates a lot of freedom. Another thing that's an element of mindfulness that's really important is non-doing. Our culture and our profession really encourage swift action, constant motion, and we don't like passivity. We really praise and reward people who move fast and get things done right away. And I will tell you, I'm a litigator too. I have clients that, have time demands and time constraints that they impose on me, and you've got to deal with that. But I will also tell you that if you never can take a beat and learn the power of waiting in law practice and in life, you're missing out. And mindfulness practice can help you start to learn this, where sometimes slowing down, taking a breath, taking a break actually is the stronger move. And then another final thing about mindfulness is that it's actually intentional. So one of the things about meditation practice that people sometimes misunderstand is that it's not just about seeing and experiencing all the stuff coming at us. Some of it is about cultivating the ability to shift our attention and the wisdom to know how to do it. So mindfulness can help us learn how to shift our focus and help ourselves through difficulty as a result. So let's talk about some quick practices that you might do if you want to consider exploring these things in your life. Doing a meditation practice, even 1 to 5 minutes a day, is a great way to start. You will cultivate a lot of these skills in the process, but if you don't want to do it, I want to go over a few Three kind of little practices to help start, like very micro practices, just to help kind of plant the seeds and get started. So grounding practices. It's a really important one to do. Grounding is really just about coming back down to earth, coming back down to our immediate experience and not getting so lost in our mental reactions to it and our thoughts about it. There's some really common ways of grounding, and one includes breath, which we're going to talk about next, and why it's really important to find your breath and how it can be used as a tool. But another really important practice, and you can do this here, is to just notice the weight of your body resting in the chair. So grounding, I want you to think almost literally about this. It's about looking for stability. It's about looking for presence and weight. So sometimes feeling your body in the chair, feeling your body not doing extra work, being supported by the chair, feeling feet resting on the ground, hands resting on your legs or the table in front of you, and taking a moment. What that does for us is it offers a little bit of stability and calm. It disrupts a mental thought pattern because it's really hard to focus clearly on physical sensations in your body and your thoughts at the same time. And it also can just give your body a chance to kind of catch up and allow your breath, your heart rate to slow down for a bit. Practices like this done in small bursts over time can help in a time of escalation. They also can be the building blocks of a relaxation practice that you might grow into something like a body scan meditation if you ever want to explore that down the road. So finding your breath. Your breath is another aspect where you can start to calm the body down. If you do have a meditation practice, when you focus on your breath for minutes a day for, years on end, you get really accustomed to finding your breath. It takes me almost no time at all. Once I start to focus on my breath, my mind honestly kind of collects there on its own a lot. And I bring my mind and body into sync and I can calm down very quick when I needed it. And I also practice this sometimes, like in my physical fitness regimen, to help myself. But honestly, when I started meditating, finding my breath in my body was actually something that really took a long time. People tell us to take a deep breath when we're escalated, but nobody teaches us how to do it. So I would encourage you sitting here to actually think about where you feel your breath in the body. And actually, there may be multiple points in your body where you feel it. And what I would encourage you to do is to notice what is the strongest and easiest for your mind to settle on. And you can actually, over time, if you play with this, you can change it. But just today, what is the place where you feel your breath the strongest? And not thinking about the breath and what sensations, but really feeling and sensing it, feeling those sensations in your body. So I encourage you to take a nice deep breath in. And where are you noticing the feelings of the breath coming in and going out of your body? Now, a few options include your nose, where you might feel cold air coming in and warm air going out. Another place might be your throat or your sinuses, again, with the cool air, the warm air, the tickling sensations of the air flowing. You may also notice your lungs filling and deflating. And the place where I prefer to focus my attention is on my belly. Because when you breathe in, your diaphragm moves with your lungs and also kind of controls the whole breathing process. And I like that backward and forward motion of the breath coming in and going out with my belly. Now, noticing your breath, a single round of breath, if you take some time with it, it should take 5 to 10 seconds. And if it doesn't, you can work on making that longer over time. No worries about that. But if you can take a few deep breaths, 5 deep breaths, that's almost a minute. And that is certainly enough time for you to kind of honestly withstand a large emotional surge. It's also enough time to at least calm down and start to realize you're triggered and maybe need to take a step back. And so doing this practice in times of escalation is a really valuable tool because your breath is the kind of connection between your mind and your body. If you want to tell your body to calm down, if you want to tell your mind to calm down, it doesn't work to just yell that at yourself or to have someone yell at you, as most of us have all experienced. What does work is if we start to talk to our body in the way it understands, and it understands through the breath. When our breath starts to slow down, deepen, expand, it tells our bodies we're safe, that for the moment we've got what we need and we can calm down and regroup. So this is an incredibly useful tool, whether you have a meditation practice or not, but this is one where you can start to kind of cultivate mindfulness, cultivate awareness just by doing something to help yourself during the day, if and when you need it. And then finally, one practice I'll bring up, which is noting. And this is really more talking about the mental aspects of when we are getting escalated. One of the things that I think is the most painful for many people when it comes to some of these emotional overwhelm situations is all of the thoughts that come with them. One thing that I've learned from 10 years plus of meditation practice is that um, one of the key things that you learn from mindfulness practice is that your thoughts are often not true. And in fact, your thoughts often, not just your thoughts, but human thoughts, often are not always helpful, useful, or relevant. And sometimes they're made up, exaggerated, and all they do is make you feel bad. And of course, we can't say all of our thoughts are bad or don't help us, because that's not accurate. And what we actually need to do is learn some wisdom around that. So one of the first like basic building blocks of this practice is to just catch yourself when you are thinking. And if you do that enough, you can start to then learn about the patterns of thought that you have. Maybe doubt comes up for you a lot, and you can start to learn, do I need to listen to that doubt voice or not, over time? But if you can start to learn and just see that you are thinking, notice that thinking is happening. Then the next piece of it is you can start to dig in and maybe let go of some of these things that cause a lot of emotional turmoil and trouble, and sometimes plant bad ideas in our head that we sometimes act on and regret. Speaking from experience here. So a really useful practice is something called noting. And you can do this in meditation if you choose. You can also do it out in the world. And this is just kind of categorizing our experience quickly and then letting it go. So we maybe notice that we're having a lot of thoughts coming out, reactions to the day, memories of what happened this morning, worries about what's coming on tomorrow. And we just say, okay, thinking, and then let it go. And then maybe we have emotions in our body and we have sensations coming up. Maybe we have a headache and we just notice, oh, feeling, sensations. And then we can even do this from the perspective of seeing, hearing, like categorizing the type of sensations we have. This is just a practice of learning to categorize our experience and get outside of it. So instead of getting sucked into the thought and getting embroiled in the story, we just realize we're thinking and we sort of put a pin in it, drop it, and then see what happens later. Or we can even maybe write it down and determine if we think it's true or useful. And then we can maybe talk about it with a loved one. But this skill of learning that you are thinking and catching yourself when you're doing it, it's a really basic and essential thing. Mindfulness practice, meditation practice is one way of doing it, but it's also something that you can do in your daily life. And if you start to do this with some regularity and develop some skill around it, then you can sort of start to catch yourself and notice the quality of thoughts, the type of thoughts, the pattern over time, and it can make a difference in how you process your law practice. And I do have one question, and I'm sorry I missed it. And I'm just getting back to it now, but Louise asked a question or a comment on procrastination. And she said it's often a result of perfectionism. And how can lawyers convince themselves that perfect is the enemy of the good? And Louise, that's a wonderful question. And then I think she also said it really happens for female lawyers. I think it does happen for a lot of us. And I will say, I have perfectionistic tendencies that I'm not sure that I will ever totally get over in my life. But I will tell you, I think one thing, what really has helped me is self-compassion. I'm going to talk about it a little bit at the end, but I explore you to look into that further. There's some compelling research on self-compassion. And it is such a strength, and it's such an important thing for lawyers. And if you want more on that, I will send you some stuff if you send me an email or find me on LinkedIn after that. But it's absolutely a true thing. And I do think that sometimes part of the perfectionism with lawyers is this idea where we have to solve all the problems for everybody, and we don't often go seek help from others. So although meditation has given me a lot of personal strengths to be able to handle things on my own more, what we're going to talk about next with window of tolerance is really where, I started to realize I do better. I solve problems more efficiently. I honestly am more helpful to people when I get the help that I need for myself. So getting help from others and really accepting it, and then looking into self-compassion for yourself, those are some two really important things I would encourage everybody to do, but especially if you struggle with perfectionism, I would look into that. Okay, so let's talk about window of tolerance. So this actually is this is a term that I think is sometimes used in a specific context, and sometimes it's really used for people who have experienced trauma, in terms of kind of rebuilding their ability to go be in the world, with everything they're dealing with. And I've taken some training on trauma, and when I learned about this, I just really thought, well, I wish I had learned about window tolerance when I was a kid. I think now in school, kids do learn a lot more about emotional regulation and understanding themselves. But really, as a practice of checking out where we are during the day, it's a hugely important thing. So this is kind of some basic self-care strategies, but it's really can make a big difference. So when we're talking about the window of tolerance, we're really talking about our comfort zone, is hypoarousal, right? Where this is where we feel good, everything is fine, but we may actually be more at risk for kind of being a little bit bored and disengaged. Our growth zone, which is our window of tolerance, this is where we have to stay engaged, but it's generally pleasant and we're okay. And then once we get to the top of that window, that's where we kind of need to find some strategies for coming back down. And then our overwhelm zone is, of course, hyperarousal, where it's too much, it's too fast, and we are at risk of having a difficult situation, making a mistake, all of those things. And so learning to identify our window of tolerance, but also to stay within it, and come back to it when we need to, that is a skill for lawyers because we are often pushed and go into difficult situations for our clients on a regular basis. And so we really do need to get this skill of taking better care of ourselves. So a way of checking in with yourself, and I know like when I started meditating, I used to do guided meditations a lot, and people would say, check in with yourself at the beginning, and I was always like, what does that mean? What are you telling me to do? Like, say it literally. And so to check in with yourself, this is one tool for doing so, and it's pause, gather, assess. And this is just a kind of a framework that you can use for identifying where you are and what you need. And if you do it kind of on a regular basis, you may not have to go through this stair step format for this, but if you just check in and say, hey, how am I doing? What do I need? It can make a difference in your day, especially if you're someone like me who tends to lose my temper when I get hangry, or, I get a headache and I can't necessarily focus and be my best self, or I'm thinking too much about problem X, I can't focus as much on problem Y. And so sometimes just these little bits of self-care can make a big difference. So pausing is really stopping just for a moment, a few breaths, a minute, 5 minutes, stopping and looking for clues about how you are feeling and doing. Those clues are probably going to be indicated in the quality of your mind, the amount of thoughts going on in your mind, the speed of the thoughts, how your body is feeling. Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? Are you sad? What is going on? Also, in your environment, is your calendar jam-packed that day? Did you just have a thing go on, in a drama unfold in your law firm? These are the things that happen to us. Did you just have your teenage daughter yell at you about some transgression that happens with kids these days? That is all stuff that does affect us. Gather up those clues and then assess to see what it is you need. That's it. Do I need to call a friend? Do I need a cup of tea? Do I need a Tylenol? Do I need to sit in a dark room for 5 minutes? Those are the basic skills. And that is really about coming back down into our window, coming back down to take care of ourselves so that we can do the things we need to do in our law practice. Now, you may not be very accustomed of checking in with your body. You may not necessarily feel super astute at identifying what's going on in your body. And if that is true for you, that is okay. That is okay. When I started meditating at first, I did not pay attention very much to my body at all. I didn't check in with how I felt on a regular basis. I honestly didn't even understand that emotions process largely in the body until I really started to pay attention. So it's okay. But if you need a way, like a platform, a framework for kind of going through your body and checking how you feel, this is what I do. So there's a style of meditation called body scan, where if you take some time, you can really kind of sense into the way the body feels systematically. It's a great relaxation strategy. It is one I teach in my book, How to Be a Badass Lawyer. But if you don't have that time, this is what I do. And this is really more checking in with kind of the usual suspects of where stress and emotion tend to show up. And that's in the eyes. And actually, as I go through this, I list this. If you want to close your eyes and check into how you feel, you can do so. You don't have to, but you can. So check in with your eyes and brow. Look for tension, crinkling, any kind of extra strain. Check in with your jaw. Is there clenching? Are you holding your mouth taut? Neck and shoulders. Where are your shoulders? Are they up like this, or are they kind of back and relaxed? Your chest and your belly. Are you feeling your heartbeat too fast? Are you feeling your breath move too fast? Are you holding your belly taut? Your hips and then your hands. In your hips and hands, you're looking for that extra tension, the extra work to just sit in your seat. And your hands, you're looking for tension and then temperature change, right? Hot, cold. And if you can allow your body to relax as you go through, it might help. Just soften it. Might help you feel better. But if not, you also might just notice what it is you maybe need. Maybe a stretch break, maybe stand up, maybe a walk. That is a quick sweep through your body. I do this a lot, like when I am about to go into a meeting, or if I'm, sitting in a meeting and I start to get restless, I maybe will do that real quickly. It doesn't even take a minute to do once you practice it, and it can give you some good information. It can tell you what you need next and how to take better care of your body. Okay, so let's talk about our final piece. So one of the big differences between compassion and empathy is, of course, that compassion is really about our connection. And empathy, unlike compassion, it really spotlights individuals. So when we are in empathy, we have our kind of isolated experience, but we're focusing on one person's issue, right? And that's not necessarily wrong. And some of us at times in our law practice, we really do need to focus on our one person's issue. Maybe it's our client, maybe it's an important interest, and we need to really be clear about it. But the reality is that there's how many billions of human beings across the world. And we actually are really, our law practices often stand to not just affect individual rights, but whole communities. I know that mine does with being a school lawyer. And so spotlighting is something that makes empathy powerful, but also dangerous, because it can shift our attention so much to one person's experience or one aspect of experience that we forget other relevant information. So, the wonderful advantage of compassion, and actually the wonderful challenge of compassion, is that it is big enough for everyone. And that includes you. That includes people who are difficult for you. It includes people you don't actually even know. compassion is big enough for everyone. And the more we can, and as I said, when we experience compassion, we are the first ones to benefit. And so if we want to really help ourselves in dealing with stressful situations, cultivating compassion is a practical way of dealing with difficulty in a way that is also good for us. So, very small ways to start. As I already mentioned in response to Louise's question, um, self-compassion is one of the best things that you can look into and cultivate as a lawyer, because it is the mental skill of being fair to yourself and learning to treat yourself well, which we all need because we're dealing with hard things. But if this is kind of new to you, these are some very small little pieces. So common humanity is actually one of the elements of self-compassion. It's the piece that allows us to stop judging and berating ourselves and start to recognize that our situation, our difficulty, our mistake, whatever it is really part of a human experience, where we start to realize that other people in the world have done the same thing. And so we can use common humanity to help ourselves, stop beating ourselves up so much, but we can also use it as a bridge to break down or at least dissolve a little bit some of those difficulties that create problems with our relationships and with other people. So when it comes to ourselves, the best friend test is one quick way of invoking common humanity. So you may have heard this one, but if you are having a difficult situation, you made a mistake, and you're beating yourself up, you can stop and say to yourself, how would I talk to myself? How would I treat myself? Or how would I treat my best friend in this same situation? So let's say you made a mistake in dealing with a client. Maybe you lost your temper in a discussion with your client. You got frustrated that they're not listening to your advice and you didn't react well. Um, or maybe you made a mistake in the strategy you used for arguing a case and it didn't get the right result. So the question is not so much, what are you going to do about it? But if you're starting to beat yourself up, you kind of would say, how would I talk to my best friend about this? And the odds are you would remind your best friend that they're doing a hard job, that they did their best, that they probably have, they knew that these risks exist in the case from the beginning, and that they did what they could to make amends for it. You'd probably talk to them with a lot more patience and kindness than you talk to yourself. Now, this is not an overnight process. This is something that takes some practice and time, but it is one little skill, one little practice that maybe can help you break up beating yourself up so much. And it also might cue you in to actually go call your best friend or your good colleague, and talk to them about the issue without revealing client confidences, of course, but getting the support for yourself that you need. Now, this can be flipped around too, where you realize that maybe for a difficult person, it's not the best friend test. It's called Just Like Me. So maybe you have a difficult opposing counsel who drives you crazy, who causes problems, who creates unnecessary fights, and you have a hard time relating to them, right? What you can do is this practice of Just Like Me, and I've definitely done this for some of my opposing counsel, where I try to remember the ways that this person is like me. And sometimes I've got to be real creative, and I have to remember this person was a kid at some point trying to figure out their way. That this person has actually people in their life that love them. This person has pressures on them that are hard to deal with. This person maybe sometimes makes big demands and takes risks just like I do. And this is really not a process where you're doing this because you're a saint or for their benefit. It's really more you're doing this to take care of yourself, let go of some reaction so that you can deal with what you need to. And this is using connection, human connection, to really connect to our better values and to help ourselves deal with a difficult situation. So there's a lot more of growth in these areas with other practices, but to get started, these are some small things just to try and to play with. And I also have a little bit on self-compassion here. The basic elements are mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. But just in case you need it, we can walk through an example where, we'll use the example of maybe you had a difficult interaction with a client and you are not happy with how you treated or responded to the situation. And you may just notice that you're beaten up on yourself. You feel sad. You feel down. You don't want to go try to, you don't even know how to go about the process of saying you're sorry and rebuilding that relationship. You feel overwhelmed, right? And you just stop and notice and say, this is a hard situation. This is difficult for me. This is a struggle. This is painful. I don't like it. And you notice it and you feel it for a minute. The next step is to recognize that your struggle is human. So you might reflect that this is a hard case, lots of risk factors, difficult situation, a big difficult history that you did not necessarily create, and that lawyers across the country actually have had the same situation. So really, it's about you recognizing that you are not wrong, terrible, bad, different, evil, or whatever because you had this trouble. And then the next piece is giving yourself what you need. What do you need as a result? Do you need to learn how to say you're sorry? Do you need to call a colleague and ask for help? Do you need to call the general counsel for your firm and talk it through? What do you need to do to make the situation better and to help yourself and to treat yourself kindly? That's it. It's not required that you have warm, fuzzy feelings about yourself. It's not required that you have a big spiritual conversion. What is required is really that you recognize your own need, you treat yourself with some kindness, and you do what it is that you need. So I am at the end, and I don't know that I saw other questions. But if there are any, I'm happy to take them. If you want some more, my book is available on Amazon or other booksellers. And I also have the blog, Brilliant Legal Mind, where I talk about these things a lot and have resources and meditations and things like that. And then in addition, you can actually reach out to me at Parsons at Breaker Graydon or find me on LinkedIn. And I strongly encourage you guys to look into the Mindfulness and Law Society. It is a group that has virtual sits twice a week. Actually, I'm doing the one for tomorrow. And there you just join on Zoom and it's great. So if you want to explore mindfulness at all, there is an easy way to get started.
Thank you, Claire. So we have a couple more questions, but if you haven't asked a question yet and you would like to, you can do so by clicking the Q&A button and submitting your question there. So we have a question from David that relates to the feeling of powerlessness. He says he specifically works in immigration law. So right now, when you're seeing all these things happening, it can feel really overwhelming. So he's asking, how do all of these tools and techniques kind of work into that larger crisis that's going on?
Yeah, and I really sympathize with you, David. I'm a school lawyer, and so some of what my clients are dealing with, and I don't compare it to your situation or anything like that. But like it is hard to see that things that happen in politics in the world do affect your clients, and then you don't have the ability to stop it. And I imagine, David, you're seeing a lot of this really up close and up front. And so what I will say is, what these practices can't do is control what happens out in the world. But what they have helped me to do is focus on what I can do. And I will say that having the ability to offer good in a world where that's not always present, or where there's other challenges, it means a lot. But it really does mean taking a whole lot of extra care of myself, really relying on my community. When some of the big changes happened in education and some of the confusion has happened, I worked with my firm a lot. I have a good practice group and we really supported each other. So if you don't have those, I would encourage you to develop those kind of things, those communities. If you do, rely on them, because that's the way we get through it. But I do appreciate your work and I appreciate that you care about your clients enough to ask a question like this.
Thank you, Claire. Really appreciate that. This next question is, how can lawyers recognize the early warning signs of empathic overwhelm before it starts to affect their judgment, focus, or even their ethical performance?
Yeah, I think the early warning signs, and I think the big one and I think some of it is knowing yourself, but I would say like you know, I think some of it is just distinguishing it from different, like normal fatigue, tired. When you're tired at the end of the day, but you feel like you can come back tomorrow, that's probably normal stuff, right? And maybe you address that by taking a little bit more extra rest over the weekend or at night if you can, leaving early from the office a little bit if it's possible. But when it becomes protracted and ongoing, and when you start to get that cynicism and that tendency to want to numb, that's where I think you should look for more help. And a lot of times, lawyers, what I'm not telling you with mindfulness practice is that you do all this on your own. What I am saying is sometimes knowing more about yourself with mindfulness can help you realize getting help from others is really important. The answer today is connection is the strongest thing we can do. And that sometimes might include from a mental health professional. It might include medication. It might include a coach or just our friends and family. So I would just say those are the early signs. And I would then, get some help from people who love and care for you.
Thank you, Claire, for that insight. Our next question is just kind of expanding on some of those practical mindfulness techniques you mentioned. So, this person asks, what are some of those techniques that lawyers can use quickly between meetings or hearings to recenter and prevent getting overloaded?
Yeah, I would say I think probably the first thing is I would say get in the habit of checking in with yourself. So that pause, gather, assess. Maybe give yourself even put it on your calendar if you have to, but build in some breaks in your day so you can check in with yourself. I think if you can cultivate some awareness of your body, which we kind of did with the body sweep, and you can learn about your breath, those are really powerful tools that help you in almost any aspect of your life. Because the body, like we are often cut off from it, but it affects so much of our mental experience. And honestly, our emotions largely happen in our body. So when we can learn to pay attention to our body and not be so afraid of all the sensations, we can learn to hold them with a little kindness. We can learn calming strategies like with our breath. Those can be game changers because that's really where stress manifests first is our body. And so that's what I would look at first. So I'd say check in first, learn about that and build that into your day. But then over time, learn about the body and learn about your breath if you can.
Thank you so much, Claire. And then our last question for today is, how can lawyers distinguish between healthy empathy that consults or results in building client trust or excessive emotional identification that can lead to that burnout we talked about today?
That's a great question. That's a really sophisticated question, actually. And I think you're probably really wanting to pay attention to yourself. So I think some things with mindfulness is that you're paying attention to your life and not just how you feel, but what is the result. So not just in the moment, but over time. So some of this is a little bit of trial and error. And so some of it means what is the result? Like once you start to pay attention, you start to know what healthy empathy feels like, and you start to know what's the difference between where I feel their problem, but I feel like I have enough left to be objective enough to offer a solution, stay in control, and be helpful and productive. That's going to be where probably you're closer to compassion, right? Because you're responding to suffering, not taking it on. But when you start to get yourself run down, and you feel really overwhelmed by it, it's not so much that you failed or it's bad. It's really more about, oh, now I need to figure out a way to kind of rest, recover, get back into my proper window of tolerance so that I can get back in the game and get back to doing what needs to be done. So some of it is really not just saying I have to stay in compassion and never go to empathy. It's also about when I start to get into empathy, what are skillful ways of bringing myself back? So it's paying attention to the whole spectrum. And when you do that, you can understand what the warning signs are for you and what helps bring you back.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire, for all of your insights, answering our audience questions, and just this really wonderful presentation today. We really enjoyed having you here. And thank you to everyone for your questions. We always really appreciate your participation. We want to thank you all so much for joining us for another Justia webinar. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a lawyer attending today, don't miss out on our Justia Lawyer Directory, a free tool to boost your professional presence. You can claim your profile at lawyers.justia.com to connect with millions of potential clients each month. And you can also explore our newly redesigned listing pages and enjoy new features on your profile, like the FAQ edition to allow you to expand your reach in search for AI results. And if you want even more visibility, we have our Justia premium placements, both gold and platinum, to help you show up above the organic listings for your practice area and jurisdiction. And you can learn more about those at marketing.justia.com. Thank you all so much for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.